They don't. And, it's not their
That's
fault
crazy.
either. And in fact, I've started to try and lobby doctors to start prescribing sleep. And don't make the mistake that that's me suggesting, prescribing sleeping pills. That's a separate story. Sleeping pills are associated with significantly higher risk of death and cancer, and I'm happy to speak about that too. It was the one chapter in the book that I think the legal team of my publisher took a very long look at. But I think doctors, to come back to your point, they on average only have about 2 hours of sleep education in the medical curriculum. So 1/3
2 hours.
2 hours. 1/3 of their
This podcast has been 2 hours.
yeah,
That's fucking crazy. So
isn't that frightening?
That's terrifying. And I bet you probably have laid things out better in this podcast than you would get in those 2 hours of education.
I don't know about that, but I think
I'll give you that credit.
if they could increase that,
That's
and
insane.
I'm desperately appealing for this. It's 1/3 of their patient's life, but they only get 2 hours of education. But the other problem is the medical industry itself, by the way. Their residents, that data, junior residents working a 30-hour shift are 460% more likely to make diagnostic errors in the intensive care unit relative to when they're working 16 hours. If you have elective surgery, you should ask your surgeon how much sleep they've had in the past 24 hours. If they've had 6 hours of sleep or less, you have a 170% increased risk of a major surgical error, such as sort of organ damage or hemorrhaging, relative to that same surgeon if they had been well rested. And then the irony here, by the way, is that when a resident finishes a 30-hour shift, gets back into their car to drive home, there is a 168% increased risk that they will get into a car accident because of their underslept state, ending up back in the same emergency room where they just came from, but now as a patient from a car crash. We need to radically rethink the importance of sleep in education, in business, in the workplace, and in medicine too.
Why do they do that to residents?
It's a fascinating story. So there's a chapter here in the book on this too. It's a guy called William Halsted, and he set up the first resident surgical program in the United States at Johns Hopkins University. And he was known for being able to stay awake for these heroic lengths of time, days on end. It's incredible, like superhuman strength. Turns out that in later years after he died, there was a dirty secret that he was actually a cocaine addict.
That son of a bitch.
And here's what happened. It wasn't his fault. Early in his career, he was examining the anesthetic capacities of cocaine. So, I'm not going to say, you may have heard from perhaps colleagues that when you snort cocaine, you get a numb face. The reason is because it blocks nerves.
I like how you said from colleagues. My colleagues have told me. I've actually never done cocaine, but I've know quite a few people who have.
And they will, they'll have this sort of numbness. It's the reason is because cocaine is also a nerve blocking agent.
Yeah, like lidocaine.
Lidocaine, yeah. Exactly.
We talked about this yesterday, ironically, on the podcast, and about doctors becoming drug addicts. The initial doctors that started doing lidocaine.
Halsted was one of them.
Yes,
and
that's
so
right.
he became an accidental cocaine addict.
Wow.
And then
so that's why he was up for days.
He was up for days, and he structured a program where he expected his residents to match him, to go toe-to-toe with him for each hour that he would remain awake.
Yeah, that sounds like what a cokehead would do. Come on, man, stay awake.
Unbelievable. And I think the story was that he actually knew that it was a problem. He went to rehabilitation, he checked in under a different surname. And one part of the regimen for him coming off cocaine was to prescribe morphine. And at the end of the rehabilitation program, he came out with both a cocaine addiction and a heroin addiction.
Oh, my God.
And so now there's rumors, that he would get his shirts laundered in Paris, in France. And, they would come back and it wasn't just the white starch, shirts that were in the box. There were other white substances too. But that's, you ask a great question. Where did that come from? Where's that history? The legacy seems to date back to William Halsted, who was an accidental cocaine addict. And there we have then maintained that inhumane practice in medicine.
Which is so critical to be awake and aware and to be sharp. You're cutting people open. You're operating on people.
And think back to what we said, about being awake. You would never accept treatment from a doctor who started, looking at your child who's sick with an appendicitis at 3 a.m. in the morning, who then swigs some whiskey and says, yeah, I'm going to do the operation. It's fine. You would go ballistic.
Right. Yeah.
Well, why do we accept treatment? After 20 hours of being awake, you're as impaired as you would be if you were legally drunk. So unfortunately, we placed young residents in this position of, acting and operating and decision-making under conditions of insufficient sleep. 1 in 5 medical residents will make a serious medical error due to insufficient sleep. 1 in 20 medical residents will kill a patient because of a fatigue-related error.
1 in 20. That's crazy.
And right now, there are well over 20,000 medical residents.
So if you have 100 of them, 5 are going to kill people.
Accidental deaths. Think
insane.
about that number.
That's insane.
If we were to solve the sleep loss epidemic in medicine, we could start saving lives. And I don't know what it is. Is it just an old boys network where we said, well, we went through it, so you've got to go through it. And the data now is so prolific. I write all about that and try to build an evidence-based, emotionless cold case for sleep in medicine, a sleep prescription for medicine, as it were.
Well, most people don't realize the requirements that residents have.
No. And they are literally, beyond human capacity. Thinking that, hubris and some degree of hours on the job is going to be able to allow you to sort of, cut short what took 3.5 million years to sort of, get in place, which is an 8-hour night of sleep. That's just thick-headed. And I think the medical profession may be at the stage where it's, my mind is made up. Don't confuse me with the facts.
Wow. This is blowing me away. I just don't understand how the very people that are working on the health of patients and fixing them and repairing injuries and taking care of diseases, those are the people that are ignoring one of the primary factors of disease and errors and cognitive function.
It's
impairment.
It's a travesty.
I have a friend who's an ophthalmologist, and he tells a story about during his residency, it was back in the 80s, and he had a pager. He was on the toilet with a tray of food on his lap because he didn't have time to eat and go to the bathroom. So he's eating food, and he fell asleep. Yeah. And then his pager went off. And he's like, fuck my life.
Yeah. I mean, how many warning bells do you need to tell you that you're in a deleterious state if you're falling asleep with your trousers around your ankles, with food all over your face, and yet you're in the deepest stages of non-REM sleep?
And he's a guy who's working on people's eyes.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, and it's, sleep is equally absent for the patient in the hospital, setting. We know that somewhere between 50 to 70% of all ICU alarms are either unnecessary or ignorable. And the one place where you desperately need the Swiss Army knife of health that is a good night of sleep is the one place where you get at least, which is on a hospital ward. We could exit people out of hospital beds earlier. The data is already there for the neonatal intensive care unit. They used to leave bright lights on 24/7.
Right.
And that would prevent sort of the signaling for sleep and wake and sleep and wake. And that cycle is critical. If you regularize light in the neonatal intensive care unit, those infants ended up having higher levels of oxygen saturation because they were sleeping better. Their weight gain was dramatically increased, and they ended up exiting the neonatal intensive care unit 5 weeks earlier.
Whoa.
Simple things. Why don't we do something like this in medicine? When you come in onto a hospital ward, you get this on an international flight travel for free. Earplugs, face mask. Even just that by itself could help people to get better sleep. Next, on the hospital admission form, tell me when you normally go to sleep and when you normally wake up. And to the best of our ability, we as doctors will try to sort of manage your healthcare around your natural sleep tendencies. If we could do that, sleep is the elixir of life. It is the most widely available, democratic, and powerful healthcare system I could ever possibly imagine. Why aren't we leveraging that and taking it? That's one of the greatest hacks that medicine could actually, inflect.
That is stunning. How is this being received? Like by doctors? Are they reluctant to listen to you? I mean, what is happening with all this data and your passionate cry for extra sleep or more sleep or the proper sleep, I should say?
It's starting to happen. I mean, when the book came out, which was sort of the hardback came out in back in October, and some people started to give pushbacks sort of in the medicine realm. You know, there was some concerns about continuity of care, that if you keep switching residents out every 16 hours, that you wouldn't have continuous patient care, and that was a problem. Well, there are other medical training systems, for example, France, Sweden, New Zealand. They do this all the time. They do not allow their residents to undergo anything longer than either a 14 or a 16-hour shift. They train their residents in the same amount of time or less. And if you look at the rankings of their medical health systems around the world, they rank far higher than the United States. So you can't tell me that longer work hours for residents, for example, are necessary to train good doctors. The evidence just isn't supportive. So I've had some pushback there. But for the most part, I think people are receptive once they know the information. And I think I've been someone who's been to blame here. I've known this evidence for, I've been doing sleep research now for 20 or so years. We are with sleep where we were with smoking 50 years ago. We had all of the evidence about the deathly, carcinogenic, cardiovascular disease issues, but the public had not been aware. No one had adequately communicated the science of, smoking to the public. The same, I think, is true for sleep right now. That's part of the motivation for why I wrote the book, why I've been doing or trying to do a lot of publicity. I'm a very shy person. I don't like being in the spotlight, but I feel as though there is a mission whose voice has not been actually gifted yet. And I wanted to try and help and be a sort of a sleep diplomat. I mean, that's why I chose the handle on social media, trying to be there as an ambassador for sleep. And now, once people start to understand the science, as we've spoken about for 2 hours, then people start to actually realize it's not the third pillar of good health alongside diet and exercise. It's the foundation on which those two other things sit. For example, if you're dieting, but you're not getting sufficient sleep, 70% of all the weight that you lose will come from lean body mass, muscle, and not fat. Your body becomes stingy in giving up its fat when it's underslept. So once you get this information out there, things are starting to change. I've started to have some discussions with the World Health Organization. They seem to be very interested now in getting to grips with sleep. I'd love to speak to first world governments, though. When was the last time you saw any first world nation have a government-supported public health campaign around sleep? I don't know any. We've had them for, drink driving, for risky behaviors, for drugs, for alcohol, for healthy eating. Sleep should be a part of that equation. I want to lobby governments to start to instigate this, and it will save them millions of dollars. The Rand Corporation did an independent survey 2 years ago on the demonstrable cost of a lack of sleep to global economies. What they found was that a lack of sleep costs most nations about 2% of their GDP, of their gross domestic product. Here in America, that number was $411 billion caused by insufficient sleep. Solve the sleep loss epidemic, you could almost double the budget for education, and you could almost halve the deficit for healthcare.
Wow.